Hello everybody, Baldur's Gate 3 is still in early access, but it has received a new update. If you didn't know, we played through the early access portion of the game back when it first released into early access, and I've been kind of keeping my ear to the ground for any updates on this, because once the game fully releases, which we now know won't happen until 2022, unfortunately, we're going to do a full playthrough of the game. So I'm going to give you guys a rundown on some of the biggest things that have come with patch 5 in case you're interested in playing the early access version. There's quite a few significant changes, and actually it makes a huge difference in the game. The first change is that when you're at the beginning of the game on the Nautiloid ship, you can rescue Shadowheart now. Before, she was just in one of the pods, and you could interact with her, you could talk to her, she'd be like, get me out of here, you'd be like, I'm trying, but nothing would happen. Well, now, you're actually able to get her out and have her as a companion on the escape of the ship, which is fascinating. Yeah, she's only there for like the last bit of the ship escape, so she doesn't necessarily permit you to suddenly kill everything on the ship, but it is nice having a third companion. The other thing with this is it does change a lot, because now suddenly you have a lot more dialogue you can do with her at the beginning. You see her with her mysterious artifact. I'm not going to spoil that if you haven't seen anything with it, but she now has more scenes with it in general. But once you free her, and now, she's with you on the escape of the ship, she's with you like right when you get off the ship, and then on the beach, you have her right away rather than having to go down to the ruins where she's like banging on the door usually, and then having to pick her up as a companion there. Now, the thing with this and why this is fascinating is because all of that still exists. You can choose not to free her, or you could just fail to free her, and then the default stuff would still be there. The essentially the conversation that was with her before while she's banging on the door. But if you do free her, then she's not there to be banging on the door, and that whole conversation never happens. And I think that's really, really cool and fascinating. It just opens up far more options for players when it comes to her. And in general, she's also been changed a bit to be a bit more responsive to the player helping her out and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a huge change, and one that I appreciate, because I actually kind of like being able to free her at the beginning of the game. Though I also like not feeling like I have to. There's options where I can get her once I'm off the ship and everything. So it changes things for good, in my opinion. But it's a small but very big change in regards to the intro of the game, even though it, in the long run, isn't going to affect too much. The second biggest change, and arguably the biggest change of the patch, is the way that roles happen now. So let's say you're in a dialogue with somebody and you're trying to intimidate them or convince them of something, and you're making, whatever role that you might be having. Well, now when the dice pops up, you have options of adding your bonuses to the rolls. So like if you have guidance, which allows you to get an extra 1d4 on your roll, if you have that as a spell, or one of your companions has that as a spell, you could cast it on yourself, because that's a cantrip, right? That you can cast freely. It doesn't take a spell slot. So that's as an option available to you. If any of your companions have any items that can add a bonus to your roll, or if you have any items or spells, or your companions have any spells or anything like that, you're able to now just add these bonuses right there to the roll, and then when the roll happens, you see all the bonuses add up. It's actually quite cool, and in my opinion, really feels like it adds the D&D aspect to the actual game, which for a game that started out as, utilizing essentially the 5th edition rules for Dungeons and Dragons, and then, just modifying them a bit, it didn't quite feel like D&D in some regards. There were obscured numbers and whatnot, but now with this change, it definitely feels like it, because you're seeing the bonuses you're adding. You're being able to cast these spells a little bit more easily. You're not having to prep it by like casting the spell on you before you have a conversation with somebody, like every time you have a conversation, just in case. So it's a quality of life change, and it makes a huge difference in the actual gameplay. Like, surprisingly, the game feels significantly different just because suddenly you feel like you have a lot more control over your rolls. And as somebody, if you watch if you watch my playthrough of the early access stuff, I roll so bad, and it's just, I don't know what it is. It just always happens. It's just my luck. But as someone who always rolls bad, suddenly I feel like I have more control over that rolling bad. It doesn't really help much, but you know what? It's nice to feel like I have more control. The next largest change, in my opinion, is the changes to camp. So if you don't know, in Dungeons and Dragons, when you're playing a caster class, or any class in general, you have the option of a short rest and a long rest. Now, when you take a long rest, you're going to restore all your spell slots because you can only cast certain, spells, a certain amount of them, and at a certain level. If you're a spellcaster, it also helps you recover HP. And if you're doing a short rest, you don't get all that stuff. You just get the HP. Unless you have something special for that, which allows your character to get spell slots back, or you're a warlock. Warlocks get all of their spell slots back on a short rest, which is part of their cool thing. But the camp has been crucial to Baldur's Gate. When you long rest, you go to camp, you sit down, you rest, and that's that. But you also have your companions there, so you could talk to them. Sometimes they get a little flirty with you. There's also interactions and stuff that happen at camp. It's a pretty important place in regards to Baldur's Gate 3. And anytime you take a long rest, you go back to camp. So it's pretty common for you to go back there if you're resting frequently enough. But here's the new thing. At camp, depending on where you take a long rest, camp changes. It used to be just in the wilderness, but now if you're in a cave or the Underdark or ruins or out in the forest, it's different depending on where you're actually taking your long rest. And I find that really cool. It's a little bit more thematic. It makes more sense. It was weird being in the Underdark and then taking a long rest and suddenly being in a forest, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So this feels a lot more polished than the previous version, but that's not all. There's more with the long rest in camp. So now when you take a long rest, you have to use provisions. So any of the food that you've gathered or anything like that will help restore more health and restore all of your spell slots. If you don't have enough supplies, you're not going to restore everything. And I find that to be a cool little mechanic that you don't necessarily have to worry about in normal Dungeons and Dragons, but in the context of Baldur's Gate 3 and in the context of Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, it makes perfect sense. In these games, in all three of those games, you collect so much food. Now, food in Divinity can be used to heal yourself or give you minor bonuses and effects, but you don't often eat them. And the funny thing is, when I was playing Divinity Original Sin 2 with my wife for the first time, she was just gobbling food down. I'm like, what are you doing? But she always seemed to have more health than me. And I was like, okay, well, it seems to be working for her. But when it comes to Baldur's Gate, again, same kind of issue. You don't really have too many reasons to have food around on you. However, now you are required to. It kind of changes the way the game plays because now you're focused on getting the supplies and keeping them, which allows you to restore your stuff when you get back to camp. And this is important regardless if you're playing a caster or not, because this also affects your companions. And more often than not, you're going to be running with companions that have spell slots. So you're going to want to be restoring those anyways. But there's also a smaller change that is outside of all of these other changes. It seems kind of strange to say this, but there is now a disengage option in combat. Before, there was no disengage, which allows you, essentially, if you don't know what disengage is in Dungeons and Dragons, it allows you to move away from a target in, the tactical combat without getting hit with an attack of opportunity, which is when that target that you're next to, you move away from them. They can use their quote-unquote reaction, which is an action they have, to attack you, to get a free attack on you outside of their turn because you're moving away from them. So it is a reaction of theirs to get an attack of opportunity. You use disengage in Dungeons & Dragons to move away, and essentially it's an action for most characters, and it allows you to not get hit. So you can remove that attack of opportunity. But if you're a rogue, you get this as a bonus action, so you're able to move around a little bit easier. So disengage is now a thing. But in regards to that, if you've been playing Baldur's Gate 3, you probably would have figured out by now that you could have jumped away. So you could use your bonus action to jump, and it was the same thing. It was disengage, but that didn't really seem right. It didn't really work the way that it should, and it didn't really match the Dungeons and Dragons rules anyway. So they changed it to actually have a disengage option, and jump no longer prevents attacks of opportunities. So just keep that in mind. But there are two final changes that I want to talk about. Now, obviously, the patch has a bunch of changes, including combat balance and a lot of bug fixes and stuff like that. But it's still in early access. That's to be expected. But the two that I really want to talk about is the first one affects me quite a bit. Essentially, they've changed how encumbrance works. Now, if you don't know, if you pick up items, you become more and more encumbered. And now with this change, you have these levels of severity for your encumbrance. So the higher you are in encumbrance, the less you get to do. And when you reach full encumbrance, you just can't take specific actions and stuff like that. And you have to get rid of some of your stuff or unload it on one of your companions. This affects me because I love looting and I pick up a lot of stuff. So my characters tend to become more encumbered, but this helps me because it means that I'm able to take more time to sort out my stuff, put it on different characters, lighten the load across the board, and also not immediately be affected by being encumbered, which was kind of annoying before, where it's like suddenly it's all or nothing, and it really sucked. But this is it's a smoother system. It works a little bit better. Now, the final change is something that is going to affect a very small number of players, but it is an important change in my opinion. Previously, you had a knockout action. So you could take the knockout action to attack somebody and knock them out and not kill them. But it got a little weird with just the way sometimes it worked. And even in my playthrough that I did, I had an issue where I knocked somebody out, but they were super hostile to me. So anytime I would re-enter that area, once they have woken up, everybody was hostile to me. It was really bad, so it was weird. But now you have a non-lethal attack that you can do. And this allows you to take down targets, in melee without killing them. So if you want to progress through the game without killing anybody, you can attempt to do that. It's going to be difficult, but it's fun to try to do that kind of stuff. As a player who really enjoys games like Dishonored or Thief or stuff like that, having the option of a non-lethal playthrough is really cool, and it might be something that I end up trying out. But those are all of the big changes coming with patch 5. Now, obviously, they've added the Druid class in the past, so that's a newer change, but it is something that we have discussed in the past, and the Druid in general feels like it's gotten a bit stronger. It's a little more fun than it was before, even though it was pretty strong before, and it just gives you, more options across the board for who you want to choose and play as. But I'm really curious if any of you are playing the early access at the moment, or do you guys come back to any of the patches as they go live, or are you like most people and are you going to wait for the game to fully release before you finally jump in? In my opinion, Baldur's Gate 3 is incredible. It is one of Larian's best game, if not their best game, and it's not even done yet, and I can't wait to see the final result. And I honestly can't wait to do a full playthrough of it when it is finally released. Still don't know what class I'm going to play. Maybe they'll add more. I don't know. If they added a barbarian, I'd be really tempted, because I like barbarians now. But a paladin, if they added paladin, would be just like okay, well, that's what I'm playing, because I feel like I really enjoy paladin. There's a bunch of stuff going on that front, though, so we'll see as we get closer to the actual release of the game. Again, let me know if you're actually going to play, if you're playing now, or if you're going to wait for the game to finally launch. And if you are playing now, what are you going about playing? Are you playing a druid? Are you playing a cleric? How are you going about playing? Are you actually going to try to do a non-lethal run? This stuff is very, very interesting. But with all of that being said, thank you guys for watching, and we shall see you guys next time.